Attorney Brian R. Kazarian with the law offices of Brian R. Kazarian. Today we're going to talk about Penal Code Section 314, which is commonly referred to as indecent exposure. Well, let's define what indecent exposure is. It is, number one, the exposure of someone's genitals to another who might get annoyed by it. And number two, that exposure had to be done in a public place with a specific intent to either arouse yourself or another. Well, since we have this type of conduct, let's talk about some examples that may or may not be considered indecent exposure. One of them is mooning, exposing your buttocks to somebody. Does that meet the criteria of indecent exposure? I don't know. What about streaking? What if somebody takes their clothes off and streaks through a public event or a sports complex? Does that consider indecent exposure for the purposes of this penal code? I don't think I have that answer either based on those facts. How about if you're changing at the beach and changing from your bathing suit into some dry clothes? Does that consider to be indecent exposure? Well, these are all questions that come up when you hire a defense attorney here at the law offices of Brian R. Kazarian. Well, let's talk about if you were actually convicted of a Penal Code Section 314 indecent exposure. Well, it holds a maximum term of confinement as a misdemeanor, 1 year in jail and a $1,000 fine and a minimum of a 10-year sexual registration. It could be considered a felony if you have a prior conviction for an indecent exposure, or you were caught exposing yourself while trespassing in a residence. There, it now turns into a felony and you could have up to 3 years in the state prison. Well, what are some of the defenses to indecent exposure? One of the defenses could be that you didn't expose yourself. That was a mistaken identity. It could be, another defense could be that whoever was being exposed to consented to that. Matter of fact, may have liked it. So, if you or a loved one are ever charged or arrested for indecent exposure, contact the law offices of Brian R. Kazarian. We're here to help.